Hey, shalom, everyone. Welcome back. Again, I want to thank Rod for allowing me to be on NETIV. And it's been a wonderful time going through the book of Daniel. Like I said, it's my fourth time through, but this is obviously far different than anything I've ever done with it before. But again, there's a lot more information, a lot more material that's available to us now than ever before. The internet may produce a lot of porn, but the internet also produces a lot of good stuff if you can find what you're looking for without having to go those places. It's amazing what you can see. Tonight we're going to do chapter 10 of Daniel, and really I'm going to be spending a lot of time talking about the book of Enoch. I've mentioned him a couple of times in the book of Jubilees. Rod and a fellow that I just met this last week, Chuck Dobbs, helped me to understand a little bit better the 70 weeks of Daniel, and they'll come up again because we're going to cover in 11 and 12. But I just think that there's just so much new material out there and so many good minds that we're going to find a lot of answers that we haven't had before. And like Rod and I and Chuck have agreed to, we actually just finished the 70th week of Daniel, and we did that on October 7th, 2023. And so what we're now in is that after phase, which we'll get into when I want to give us a couple lessons on Ezekiel and Zechariah to help us understand all of it that's going on. But for tonight, let's stick to chapter 10. I want to read a larger section tonight to begin with, just to get to my basic subject. So if you have a Bible, if you want to look at chapter 10, it begins by saying, in the third year of Cyrus, and his name is Koresh, actually, in the third year of Koresh, king of Persia. Now, this third year of Koresh is actually his last year. He will die this year in battle, and he'll be replaced by Ahasuerus, which is the book of Esther. But anyway, in the third year of Koresh, king of Persia, a matter was revealed to Daniel, who was named Belshazzar. Now, we haven't heard that name since back in the first chapter of the book of Daniel, when Nebuchadnezzar had given Belshazzar the name to Daniel. But remember, Daniel, the name Belshazzar was the highest compliment he could have given because that was his God. That was his understanding of God. And so he names it Belshazzar. Now, the matter was true, but for a long time off to understand the matter and to explain it to him through a vision. So we're going to look at in 10, 11, and 12, because these three chapters are going to tie together in this section. Now, remember, if you would, back to the very beginning, when I started talking about the fact that the book of Daniel is not in sequence. And the reason it's not in sequence is because it was never written in sequence. They were written in parchment scrolls. It was the sages who put these scrolls together as they understood it and as they felt comfortable with it. So that's why we've done some chapters in Belshazzar, and then we've done Darius, and then we went back to Belshazzar. We just have all of these different years rolling through. It's nice that Daniel did give us the year to help us understand the framework of what's going on. So this is the last year of Cyrus. 2 years prior to this, or just as this is ending, I guess, Koresh, Cyrus, is going to tell Daniel and tell Israel to go home. To go home. And so that is the prophecy, that part of the prophecy that's been given to him, but it's not even spoken of here. We go to the second verse and it says, in those days, I, Daniel, had been mourning for 3 weeks of days. 3 weeks of days. But notice when it says, I ate no desirable bread, meat or wine, did not enter my mouth, and I did not anoint myself until to the completion of the 3 weeks of days. Now then it was the 24th day of the first month, and the first month is Nisan. Well, what's the most important time during the Hebrew year is Nisan. That's Passover. Can you think of Daniel, who was an Orthodox, not honoring Passover, but still managing to keep his fasting? Now, the sages come to the conclusion that, yes, if that's true, if this is the month of Nisan, and it is the, excuse me, the 24th day, and look at the weeks that he had. He fasted for 21 days, but we're on the 24th day of the month. It's assumed that during those 3 days that are not counted were the Shabbases. That's the days that he did eat properly. And that was what was going on. So anyway, as we go through, it says the 24th day of the first month, I was next to the great river, which is Hiddekel. Okay. You have to go back to Genesis, to the 2nd chapter, to find Hiddekel. Hiddekel was one of the 4 rivers that flowed out of Eden. Hiddekel, later by the rabbis' understanding, was the river Tigris. But Tigris isn't in Persia. The Tigris is the northern river of the Euphrates, or along the Euphrates. That's in between those 2 rivers is called the Fertile Crescent, and Babylon was between those 2. So was Daniel in Persia, or was Daniel in Babylon or the Babylonian area? But anyway, he was near the river or near water. And water is important, remember, because water is about purification. And to receive a message from God, if we look at the character Ezekiel, remember Ezekiel's first message came to him when he was by the river Kavar. And as we go through this whole process, then we understand that there's something explained here that we hadn't seen before. So here he is by this river that's in Egypt, or that's in Babylon. Now, again, this is a vision. So the question is, did it really take place there, or did the vision take him to that place? That's the question. Now I raised my eyes and I saw, and behold, one man. Does not name the man. It just simply says one man. Now, in the book of Ezekiel, in the 9th chapter, there's another character there that Ezekiel sees, and he's called just a man. The same language is used for him. But it says he was clothed in linen, his loins girded with fine gold. His body was like Tarshish, and his face like the appearance of lightning, and his eyes like the flaming torches, and his arms and legs were like the color of the burnished copper. And the sound of his words loud as the sound of a multitude. I, Daniel, alone saw the vision. The people who were with me did not see the visions, but a great fear fell upon them, and they fled into the hiding. Okay. Let's go back to an understanding of what a vision is. How could he see a vision and the men who were with him did not see it? Well, a vision takes place in one's mind. It's not physical. It's not something where he stands there and can panoramically view everything that's going on around him. Literally, this is all going on in his head. But there was such trauma in what was going on in his head. What did it do to his companions who could not see the vision? You notice what happened to them? They began to what? They got fearful and they went and hid. Now the question is, who were they that went and hid? Well, according to the sages, again, in the book of Megillah, the sages were 1, Ezra, 2, Zechariah, and 3 was Malachi. Now, those are important figures biblically, yet they were not subject or were not even involved in what was going on. So he's having this vision in his head, but it is so traumatic that they began to panic by it. They began to change. And so we're looking at something that, in a normal way of looking at it, was panic-filled. Panic-filled. Now, they've said that the character that, with the description that we had, one of the possibilities was that this character was a priest with the linen garments. There are other descriptions that are given to him, but I began to think about this for a while, and I went to a book called the Book of Enoch, First Enoch. I don't know if you've read Enoch. If you have, you know that it's actually 3 different books. The first one's written in Hebrew, the second one's written in Aramaic, and the third one's written in Hebrew. Now, they say that Enoch was the author, but the book has a writing date of about the 2nd century BC. And because it's in that period in time, we also have to understand what the culture of the world was, or Israel was at that point. You see, now was a time when people were beginning to look into the future. They wanted to know what was happening. And in the process of understanding what was happening, a lot of material was beginning to pour out. The material was coming from a group called the Essenes. I don't know if you really know much about the Essenes. One of their biggest and best known communities was down in the Qumran Valley. That was the area down along the Dead Sea area. And if you were to go that area, and if you've been that area, you know that along there you see all of these caves on the hills. Well, it wasn't until 1947, just before Israel becomes a nation, that the caves, shepherds were out there and they threw a rock into the cave and broke a jar. And they went into the cave and they found 3 vessels that had not been broken, and inside were scrolls. And they began to bring the scrolls out. A French father, a priest, by the way, who was there, took a look at these scrolls and he hoarded them, kept them for the Catholic people. Because you see, the scrolls that he found were scrolls that were biblical. And he was worried that the Catholic religion would be tainted by what he was reading, or what had been written. And so he hid it. And it wasn't until 1990 that these scrolls began to show up, and people are now able to look at it other than through a Catholic eye. There are basically 60,000 scrolls or scroll pieces that have been found. Some of the best ones are in the can't think of the name of it, behind glass. It's the book of Isaiah. There are 4 or 5 books of Isaiah. They're all identical, indicating that the scribe who did it the same way, 1 letter at a time. Not only is that there, but also the books of Enoch are there. And there's 5 or 6 copies of Enoch, and there's several copies of the book of Jubilees, and there's copies of what's called the War Scroll. The War Scroll is the book of the sons of light versus the battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. All of these are basically, if you look at them, are what they call Merkava, Asiya Merkava, which is the idea of the building of the chariot. So he's talking about God and future. There's more scrolls that are called Eklot. Eklot scrolls are about the palaces. We're going to talk about the book about Enoch. Enoch was the one who began the process, according to our story, began the process of describing the palaces of heaven and describing the angels of heaven and talking about them. I want you to look back at Genesis, and I want you to go to the 5th chapter. This isn't unusual, is it, that we find ourselves going to different parts of the Bible? I just want to make sure that everybody is Bible looks as badly as mine, but used. But we're in the 5th chapter of the book of Genesis, and we're going to look at verse 21. Now, as we look at verse 21, one of the things that I want you to notice is that this is the story of Enoch. Enoch is the 5th from Adam. Enoch's name is Hanoch. Hanoch means to be dedicated or to be educated. So Hanoch lived 65 years and he begot Methuselah. Enoch walked with God for 300 years after begetting Methuselah, and he begot sons and daughters. Now, all the days of Enoch were 365 years, and Enoch walked with God. Then he was no more, for God had taken him. Now, this poses a problem. First off, if you compare his lifespan with everybody else's, you notice that he doesn't live as long. And he doesn't die according to the way the text is written. He is just taken. So what's missing? Well, that's what the book of Enoch begins to talk about. In fact, it takes the first, 36 chapters just to describe this section. Now, it includes more than this, but the idea is that this is the section that we need to understand. And so there's lots of places where they begin to look at this whole thing. And as they're looking at it, they begin to, in the book of Enoch, they begin to add to the understanding of what's going on. Now, one of the problems with this is the fact that the word for God here is the word Elohim. Elohim can mean judges. So the rabbi said, well, this is talking about the fact that he met with the judges, or he walked with judges. But people had trouble understanding that. And what was worse, they had trouble understanding how a person could live and never die and end up being with the judges. How did he get there? What happened? Well, in the first book of Judges, it begins to go through this understanding. And let's see, do I need to give you more information than that? Yes, I do. Let's look at the character above it. The character is called Jared. I named my son Jared, not understanding who Jared was or what Jared was. But Jared is going to be the father of Enoch. But the word Jared means to come down or to bring down. Back in those days, the descriptions of the children usually followed a major event. What was the major event that caused his father to name him Jared? Well, it was, according to the Talmud, in his day, in Jeremiah's day, angels began to descend to this earth to be with men. Actually, not with men, but with women. Which leads us to Genesis chapter 6. And if you look at Genesis chapter 6, you notice how it begins. And it came to pass when man began to increase upon the ground, and daughters were born to them, the sons of the rulers, or the sons of God, depending on how you want to look at it, saw that the daughters of man were good, and they took themselves wives from whomever they chose. Now it goes on to say, and Hashem said, my spirit shall not contend evermore concerning man, since he is but flesh, and his days are but 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. Confusing. What's going on? That's the point that this whole thing gets at. Hashem apparently sees the wickedness of what's going on the earth. And in seeing what's going on, Jubilee or Enoch give us some descriptions or some helps. In the first one, it begins by saying, and it was when men began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born unto the B'nai Ha-Elohim, the sons of God, saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took themselves wives from them. Now, as he goes into chapter 3, he begins by saying, and it came to pass when the children of men had multiplied in those days and were born unto the beautiful and comely daughters, the angels, the children of heaven, saw and lusted after them. And he said one to another, come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men and beget us children. And this is one of the names, Semhajah, who was a leader, said unto them, I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. And they all answered him and said, let us swear an oath and bind ourselves by mutual imprecation, not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. Then they all swore together and bound themselves by mutual imprecation upon it, and they were all 200 of them descended in the days of Jared. Remember, the word Jared is descend. Here's what's descending: 200 angels from heaven. Now, they descended first on the Mount Hermon, and they called it Mount Hermon because they had sworn and bound themselves to a mutual imprecation upon it. So we now find our story going sideways. The daughters of men were very good looking, evidently, so good looking that the angels couldn't stand it any longer and wanted to marry them. And so they came down to choose a wife. Now, if you go through Enoch carefully, you'll find out that they chose any woman that they wanted, whether they were married or single, made no difference. And they chose this woman and they caused her to become pregnant. What happened? They created children. What kind of children? The Nephilim. The Nephilim. Now, we know the Nephilim as being giants. What we don't know is, again, in the book of Enoch, is some passages about them. So let me share another passage. So it came to pass when the sons of men increased in those days and were born to them fair daughters, the angels, the sons of heaven, saw them and desired them, come, let us choose. So they chose from this group. And then it goes on to say, and they, the human woman, became pregnant and bore large giants, Nephilim. And their height was 300 cubits. These devoured all the toil of men, all of their things that they've been working on, until the men were unable to sustain the Nephilim. And the giants turned against them in order to devour them. And they began to sin against birds and against animals and against reptiles and against fish, and they devoured one another's flesh and drank the blood from him. Then the earth became Hamas, lawless. That's the story that Enoch paints. Now, how could Enoch have gotten that story, or where did that story come from? Well, again, we have to go back to who the Essenes were. You and I never can find the word Essene anywhere in the Bible. We will not find the word Essene anywhere in the Talmud. It is just not there. You see, the Essenes were considered by the religious Jews of the time as being heretics. They followed that old understanding. They lost track of what's going on. You see, one of the things that the book of Enoch does is it begins to explain dating of the earth and begins to explain the cycles. Turn back to Numbers chapter 12 for a second, and let me give you an understanding. Or Exodus chapter 12, excuse me. Exodus chapter 12, and we're going to do the first couple of verses. Okay? I got you with me, I hope. So Hashem said to Moses and to Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, this month shall be for you the beginning of the months, and it shall be for you the first of the months of the year. Now, the month that he's talking about is the month of Nisan. This shall become your first month. Now, remember, there was already a first month of the year, and it wasn't Nisan. It was actually what we would call Tishri today. But I wanted to let you know that Tishrei and Nisan are Babylonian. You see, the Bible doesn't use months until after, well, it uses them before, but it doesn't, they weren't created until the Babylonian era. So we had to impose, because you see, the first thing it says is this will be the first month, not the month of Nisan. This shall be the first month. It goes on to say. So we now switch our calendars. The calendar is now going from the month of Tishri, which is fall, to the month of Nisan, which is spring. We also have another problem that's going to go on. The problem that's going to go on is dating. In a Jewish calendar today, the number of days in a Jewish year are 354 because they follow a lunar calendar. Now, the lunar calendar was established by the rabbis, but that was not the calendar that was there before the Babylonian exile. At the Babylonian exile, the Jewish calendar was composed of a solar year. Now, as a solar year, it's not 365 and a third or a fourth. It was 364. 30 days in a month, plus the equinox and the solstice and the equinox. I can't think of what I'm looking for, but anyway, that's in my head. So they changed the calendar. So there's 30 days in a month times 12, that's 360, plus the extra 4 days is 364. That is the year that should have been followed. But the Jewish rabbis changed to create this new calendar. And in order to make that balance, they had to create a 13th month, remember? And that's the month of Adar, the second Adar. So those were the months that have been created. Well, since they refused to follow those calendars, they were shunned. But that wasn't their only problem. You see, the Essenes believed in Zadok. He was the high priest appointed by David and his lineage. But we know that after the coming back to the land, the lineage of the high priest was not admired. And to the point where by the time we get to the Hasmonean dynasty, the Hasmoneans were not of the tribe of, not a Levi, not a Cohen. They just became. We know that in the days of Herod, we know that he appointed people that may not even have been in the Levite tribe. So we began to lose track of not only the Cohen, but we lose track of the calendar. And therefore the Essenes left Jerusalem, moving outside multiple places, but the main focus was down in the Qumran Valley. Since they were no longer priests as we would recognize them, they simply followed the calendar of 364. They simply spent their time recording for posterity, or hope for posterity, what was going on. They will find that during the days of the Romans, when they began to clear cut the nation of Israel, remember, in about 66 through 70 AD, they began to march across Israel, eliminating and the Essenes were eliminated. We only have record of what was going on there and the buildings that are left. In fact, for a while, they began to think that the Essenes were only men, that's the reason that the Catholics adopted the male policy. But since then, they have found some graves of children and women, but they haven't gone very far into digging because of the fact of the cultural heritage. So they just simply understand that this was a group that practiced what we would call true orthodoxy based upon the laws that are in the first 5 books. And so that's how the whole thing started. Now, in the case of Enoch was one of the books that they wrote. Enoch tries to explain to us what happened to Enoch himself. In fact, they say Enoch wrote it, but he couldn't possibly, well, he could have because he never died, but it was written by someone else. And in the course of time of his writing, what he began to understand is the fact that when at 65, he produced Metzulah. At 65, he also began to walk with God. And the question becomes, what does it mean he walked with God? Now, if we're talking about a Rabbi Akiva, walking with God was his attempt to reach heaven, to go as high as he could, to get to what we call today paradise. That's that world that we will go to after we leave this one. And so in this process, then he begins to learn from God. And God uses him like he's using Jeremiah, like he uses Ezekiel, like he uses many of his other prophets, only he was sent to the Nephilim. He was sent to the angels that lost their first estate. By the way, lost their first estate. Jude, verse 14. You see, in the book of Enoch, you will find multiple verses that are New Testament verses. They pulled from Enoch. They pulled from Jubilee to help frame the first 4 Gospels. That's where they're getting their information from. So it was fascinating to begin to read the book of Enoch, the first one especially, because it deals with this whole area. Turn back in your Bibles, not to where we're at, but I want you to go to Daniel chapter 4. And I want to refresh your memory about one verse, verse 14 in chapter 4. I didn't spend a lot of time doing it, but I want to make sure I hit it tonight. Verse 14, chapter 4. Okay, are you with me? This is dealing with Nebuchadnezzar again. Remember, he has this dream about the tree. In 14, he says, the matter is by decree of the angels. By the decree of the angels. And the sentence is by word of the holy ones. I want you to look at that word holy ones for a second, and then I want us to go on. It says, so all the living beings may know that the Supreme One rules over the kingdom of man, giving it to whomever he wishes and appointing it to those he chooses. There's an interesting phrase where it says holy ones. It's those who are watchers. The Hebrew there is for the word for watchers. Those are the holy ones. Now we have to ask the question, what are watchers? There are no other phrases in the Old Testament that can help me. But guess who has answers? Book of Enoch, first Enoch, has the answers for me. You see, the first of Enoch deals with these chapters of angels. The angels are also going to be something else that we can look at. So go back to chapter 10 and let me pull a verse for you again. I want to skip down to verse number 13. But the heavenly prince, the Persian kingdom, stood opposed to me. the heavenly prince is a watcher. He is a watcher. You see, the watchers were those that were in charge of the different nations. The watchers were the command group. The prince was the overriding one. He had an army. Each of these 70 angels that were in the book of Genesis chapter 10, each of them had their own person that was in charge. Israel, which will be formed later, will not have a prince like the rest of them. That will belong to God. God will place over them a person named Metatron. Metatron, by Jewish understanding, is Enoch. When Enoch left this planet and to be with God, he actually moved into the place of second in command. He became the Joseph of the heavenlies. And so, being the Joseph of the heavenlies, he guards Israel. Now, his other name that they're used is the word Michael. So he's either going to be called Metatron or he's going to be called Michael. Those are the two names that are given to this angel who is standing guard over the Jewish people, even over the Jewish people tonight, as they go through what they're going through now. But we begin to understand that the prince objected to this angel coming down to meet with Daniel to tell Daniel what's going on. That's what was going on at this point in time. The angel prevented him, or the prince prevented the angel. Now, the angel could have filed a complaint, wrote it out in triplicate, left it there on the doorstep, seen if there was somebody that would make the judgment. But instead, he called for assistance. And we find that in our story then, who comes to assist him, but none other than Michael. Michael is the one who comes to assist him. Now, eventually, we find that the one man becomes Gabriel, we think. But let's go back and let's look at that a second time, one more time. So we find that he's prevented from coming. Well, let's do 13:2. But the heavenly prince, the Persian king, stood opposed to me for 21 days until Michael, one of the foremost heavenly princes, came to help me, for I had remained there alone beside the kings of Persia. Notice it's plural. Besides the watchers. Do you remember Esau? When Jacob came back to the land, Jacob came back after leaving Laban. Remember that? He sent a letter, or he sent a messenger, or he actually sent messengers, plural, to Esau to let him know that he had come back. The messengers went down and the messengers came back. And remember what the messengers told Jacob? Esau and 400 are already on their way. Well, the question is, who were the 400 he was bringing? We could say they were men, and that would work. But Esau was also bringing his prince, the prince over Edom. And the 400 were 400 of the kings of Edom coming with him. You understand, the watchers themselves stood guard over their countries and were protecting their countries. When Jacob meets with Esau, he meets with him in the land that is occupied by the Edomites. Therefore, the prince, the watchers, is with them. The same story holds true here. The prince of Persia does not like the fact that this character is coming to visit this Jew in my territory. You see, the Jews aren't under my command, but I'm just going to refuse to let anybody come to see him. Only because of Michael. And remember, Michael is that second in command. So he has the ability to overrule the prince of Persia, which is exactly what he does, is overrule him at this point in time. And so at this point, we begin to see that there's a lot of things that are going on within the nation itself. Now, as we continue on through the verses, it says, as he spoke these words to me, I set my face towards the ground and I was dumbfounded. As he spoke these words, now remember, they're all in his head. Everything is going on within him. This is an internal battle within his brain. He's seeing this thing, this image of the angel coming. He sees the prince. He sees Michael. He sees all of this in his head. And now that the angel has arrived, he now begins to crumble. Would you not become exhausted in your head if you saw all of this going on? Imagine for yourself how much a human mind can take. So he continues on. Then behold, one with the likeness of a human being touched my lips. I opened my mouth and I spoke, and I said to the one standing opposite, and remember, angels' legs do not work. Remember, they have no kneecaps. They're standers. That's why they stand all the time. That when you go to the prayers and you speak of angels, they're standing prayers. That's the Amidah. That's the purpose of that. So he goes through this understanding. My Lord, during the vision, my joints shuddered and I could not retain no strength. How can this servant of my Lord speak with this Lord of mine? How can I talk to an angel? That's what he's asking. From now on, no strength will remain in me, and there is no breath left within me. He's exhausted. Then he, the likeness of the human being, touched me again and strengthened me. He said, fear not, greatly beloved man. Peace to you. Grow stronger and stronger. And as he spoke to me, I strengthened myself and I said, speak, my Lord, for you have strengthened me. And then he said, do you know why I came to you? Now I will return to do the battle with the heavenly prince of Persia. Did I miss something there? Did I miss the language between the two? We go from the fact that he strengthened me to all of a sudden he says, and do you know why I came to you? Now I will return to do battle with the heavenly prince of Persia. And then I will depart, but behold, the heavenly prince of Greece approaches. However, I will tell you what is inscribed in truth writing. No one reinforces me except your heavenly prince, Michael. So he hasn't told him anything yet. Well, we don't know that he told him anything. We just know that he strengthened him. And now I've got to go return. Notice where he's returning to. He's going to go immediately get in combat with the prince of Persia, and soon he will find himself in combat with the prince of Greece. We think that the heavenly area is peaceful, and the only thing that goes on there is singing, harps, those kinds of things. Please understand, in the world above us, not in heaven, where we would normally think of as heaven, not in the area of the throne room or any of those, but in the area above us, there is a war. Just like there's a war here on earth. When we see the battle that's going on between Israel and Hamas, or Israel and Persia, in essence, we are looking at what is going on in heaven. There is a war happening in the heavenlies. There is a struggle that is going on constantly. All the wars that are going on here, we call man-made, are also heavenly wars. That is an important understanding. If you were a Kabbalist, this is a chart called the Sephirot. This was one that would be used if you were doing Jubilees and you were looking at the Helikot, looking at the heavenly palaces. If you were here as Malkut on earth, Between you and what is above is what they call a line that's called the veil of profane. The veil of profane, let me put it this way. When you go to sleep at night, your soul partially leaves your body, attempting to go to where God is at. Now, in this process of moving upwards, how often do you find yourselves in the midst of dreams? Some dreams are good, some dreams are nightmares. You're attempting to pass through this veil of profane to reach heaven. We all want to be there, but we're all here, and we're here for a purpose. Many of the true Kabbalists, the ones that are in constant prayer, their goal is to penetrate that veil of profane, to reach the higher levels, to learn and understand that which they cannot normally grasp down here. They need an angel like Daniel had. They need somebody to give them that spark, somebody to help them through. In our story today, we're looking at a war that's going on in the heavenlies, an angel attempting to reach Daniel, who's blocked by the king of the area above where Daniel is at, whose only hope of getting there is Michael. That war will continue until the Mashiach comes. It is an ongoing war. Now, we're involved in a war that is located in Israel right now, but there are wars going on in lots of places across the world. All of them involve heavenly beings and earthly beings, two different groups that are functioning. Some we call evil, some we call good. But that's what's going on. Now, over the next 2 chapters, we're going to try to unloose what it is that Daniel was told. We're going to do 11 and 12, and then we'll go working our way through the 3 wars of Gog and Magog and those things that are going to happen. But that's our goal, is to begin to understand what's going on, to begin to understand how things have been shaped by God. God is involved in this whole process. He is using it and us to reach him. And that is our goal, to reach him. Now, we can go by ourselves, or we can talk to others and help them to go with us. That's the goal. So, I talked for 48 minutes. I guess that's enough. Anybody have anything they want to say? Questions they might want to ask?